Molweni, Mangwanani, Jambo Hubari, Zenu. Welcome to this 8th Annual Teaching and Learning Conference. It is my singular privilege and honor to introduce to you Dr. Rabbi Danpath, who is the Director of Teaching and Learning, and most importantly, who is the Chair of the 8th Annual Teaching and Learning Higher Education Conference. Dr. T, please come and address the House. A round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, higher education in South Africa has commanded unprecedented attention from various quarters. We've heard accusations, allegations, and exhortations from various quarters, not least from the government itself. For instance, Business Day, 5th of September, reporting on a conference of the Progressive Professionals Forum, alludes to the President's call for patriotic universities. Zuma says the country's transformation agenda should find expression in the curriculum of universities. He notes that education is a primary means of socialization, but then he goes on to say, this must not be seen as an attempt at indoctrination or a threat to institutional autonomy, but rather as an intervention to reinforce academic freedom. Yeah. So is that a classic example of a paradox, oxymoron, or absurd incongruity? The contradiction is reinforced in the course of his oratory. He says, students must emerge from institutions of higher education as patriotic citizens. Academic freedom means freedom from the ideological stranglehold of any social class, and universities must not be institutions that exist merely to legitimate the views of one group over another. Is that profound? The opposition, the Democratic Alliance, in its response, retorts. Both institutional autonomy and academic freedom are protected under our Constitution. Do the ANC's statements mean that yet another part of the Constitution is no longer to the satisfaction of the fickle and grasping rulers? The DA laments that under the leadership of the current President and Higher Education Minister, a tone of growing resentment towards one of the most precious resources in the country, our best universities, appears to have become firmly embedded in the ANC discourse. The DA warns that the government needs to be aware that the anti-intellectualism that it embraces is dangerous to our society and to our future. Without the ferment of new ideas and original thought, we will be unable to cope with the 21st century challenges that we face. And for the DA's temerity in attacking the government, the Higher Education Transformation Network condemns what it calls the Democratic Alliance's populist tendencies of seeking to score very cheap political points by raising matters of lesser importance. Individual institutions, too, have been targets of vitriolic attacks. UCT, University of Cape Town, has been accused of being a campus at odds with itself. The Vaal University of Technology is allegedly on the boil, while self-proclaimed change theorists in the Department of Higher Education and Training have instructed management and students at UKZN to engage in talks to end the recent strike. Now, higher education has always been the site of contestation, and indeed, it has always been the proxy of societal content or discontent, as well as the benchmark for economic stability. Why then has its importance recently escalated and labeled by the Communist Party as a generational catastrophe, unquote? More interestingly, how is it that we now have a proliferation of experts champions and public intellectuals who deem themselves qualified to pronounce on higher education? In my view, the answer lies somewhere in between the pages of Guy Standing's The Precariat and in the book The New Dangerous Class, and Henry Giroux's Beyond Neoliberal Miseducation. Those of us who attended this conference last year will recall Guy Standing's warning of the emergence of a new social class, the precariat, who as a consequence of neoliberal globalization, particularly as it relates to employment, suffer the condition of perpetual uncertainty and insecurity and are condemned to existence without predictability. The proletariat youth, who constitute both graduates and dropouts from higher education, are becoming increasingly vocal, skeptical, and cynical of regimes that protect the interest of capital while condemning youth to servitude in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent and the globe. Fear of the precariat has rendered governments paranoid and paralyzed, redirecting its paranoia to higher education. Giroux, too, argues that workers, students, and youths, and the poor are all considered expendable in the neoliberal economy. Yet, the one institution, education, that potentially offers opportunities for students to challenge these anti-democratic tendencies is under attack in ways that are unparalleled, at least in terms of the scope and intensity of the assault by the corporate elite, other economic fundamentalists, and government itself. Giroux adds that casino capitalism does more than infuse market values into every aspect of higher education. It also wages a fully fledged assault on public goods, democratic public spheres, and the role of education in creating an informed, enlightened citizenry. In a society wedded to narrow, instrumentalist values, ignorance is a political tool which nourishes a deep-seated fear of civic literacy. Critical thinking and a literate public have become dangerous to those who want to celebrate orthodoxy over dialogue, emotion over reason, and ideological certainty over thoughtfulness. It's hardly surprising, therefore, to see an ascendancy of what Michael Foucault calls governmentality, the tendency of governments to use their political power to wrestle control of education and to create and recreate curricula and other policies that are responsive to its political ambitions. Regrettably, the academy has largely been complicit in its silence against this erosion of the integrity of the university as a bastion of enlightenment. Thankfully, though, in the words of Edward Said, there are in every society persons with an unusual sensitivity to the sacred, an uncommon reflectiveness about the nature of their universe and the rules which govern their society, a minority of persons who speak out against gregariousness and the personal cost be damned. I am privileged today, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome our intrepid scholars who have been the beacons of hope through their fearless scholarship and intellectual activism. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome on your behalf, in order of their appearance in the handbook, our keynote speakers for the 8th Annual Teaching and Learning Conference. Professor Gayatri Spivak, who is not here yet, I think, of Columbia University. Each of the speakers will be introduced in their sessions as we progress. Professor William Pinar of the University of British Columbia, Canada. That's Bill in the blue shirt at the bottom. Professor Ritumitsi Makobela, is she here yet? Yeah. Welcome, Ritu. Prof Zozino, who insists on being called Prof Zozino, he is right there, from the African Union, and our very own Dr. Langa Kumalo of UKZN. Let me also extend a warm UKZN welcome to each and every one of you who graces this conference with your esteemed presence. I'm especially pleased to welcome a large number of international guests. On behalf of the conference coordinating committee, I wish you all an intellectually stimulating experience, but also a socially rewarding one. It now gives me privilege to introduce you to our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Teaching and Learning, Professor Renuka Vital, to deliver the opening address.
Morning, colleagues. It's wonderful to see the House full of the delegates for this, the 8th Annual Teaching and Learning Conference, and especially a warm welcome to our special guests who have made themselves available to engage us in this conference. It's really quite a wonderful achievement for the Teaching and Learning Office to have grown the conference in the way they have over the last few years. And this year we have especially been taking some time to take stock of what we've achieved and where we've come and try to contextualize that in respect of teaching and learning in higher education in general and in universities in particular. Teaching and learning in South African universities this year is firmly on the agenda and will be so for the next several years, at least 5 of them, with the launch of what the Council for Higher Education has called the Quality Enhancement Project, which they launched in February this year. And this project, which will focus on undergraduate provision in particular, comes on the heels of other initiatives and other reports and investigations that have taken place regarding undergraduate education, such as the Council for Higher Education's proposal for extending the undergraduate degree by a year. Of course, we still wait to hear if this idea that the undergraduate curriculum be reconsidered. We still wait to hear how the Department of Higher Education will respond to that. But there have been widespread discussions for some time now. And of course, higher education, especially the undergraduate provision, has come under quite significant media attention. In particular, the constant refrain about the low numbers of students, or the high dropouts, the low percentages of students that are graduating from the system and graduating in the time that is assigned to them, and so on. What these developments do, in addition to what you heard in the opening address, is that they do shift the focus in some ways from issues of access and from issues about the relationship of universities to schooling and to issues of what the deficits that students bring into the system, more to looking at what happens within universities. And so one outcome of all of this at a national level is that it opens opportunities for higher education institutions themselves to direct their research, knowledge, and expertise to their own terrain and their own work. And I think the Teaching and Learning Conference has contributed or such conferences have contributed in some way to developing at least one area of scholarship that has recently emerged in the last few decades around the generally referred to as a scholarship of teaching and learning. So it is quite a recent phenomenon, and most writers who refer to the scholarship of teaching and learning refer to the seminal work of Ernest Boyer in Scholarship Reconsidered, Priorities of the Professoriate, as contributing to enlarging the perspective of academic life and the meaning of scholarship itself. And I'd like to just read a quote from there to move us along in our own discussions. in the Scholarship Reconsidered, Boyer says, the time has come to move beyond the tired old teaching versus research debate and give the familiar and honorable term scholarship a broader, more capacious meaning, one that brings legitimacy to the full scope of academic work. Surely, scholarship means engaging in original research. But the work of the scholar also means stepping back from one's investigation, looking for connections, building bridges between theory and practice, and communicating one's knowledge effectively to students. Specifically, we conclude that the work of the professoriate might be thought of as having 4 separate yet overlapping functions. These are the scholarship of discovery, the scholarship of integration, the scholarship of application, and the scholarship of teaching, close quotes. This notion of the scholarship of teaching has, of course, been broadened in more recent time to refer to the scholarship of teaching and learning. And this work has produced a lively debate and ongoing contestation about the exact nature of a scholarship of teaching and learning. It has generated a wide literature, even whole conferences and journals, etc. And engagement around issues of definition, perspectives, models, and approaches to scholarship of teaching and learning. It has spanned research, practices, theories in student experiences, in teaching the educational aspects of disciplines, as well as issues of academic work, and in particular about how academic work rewards and recognizes teaching. For South Africa, and for the South African context of higher education in particular, arguably it has shifted or enabled a widening of a dominant discourse on policy and academic development to a much deeper scholarship on many other areas of mainstream teaching and learning in universities. So viewed through the lens of a scholarship of teaching and learning, UKZN has made considerable strides in growing different aspects of a scholarship of teaching and learning since the creation of this rather unique portfolio. For one, when the portfolio was established in 2008, in 2009, one of the key initiatives we implemented was to make available a teaching and learning competitive research grant. And the very next year, in response to the demand, we initiated a teaching, innovation, and quality enhancement grant. And since the time these grants have been put into place, we have received more than 200 proposals. 118 have been funded to the value of some 5.8 million, benefiting some 345 staff across the university. And if we analyze the kinds of projects, it's quite interesting to note that most of them have focused, more than 40% have focused on students and learning, which dominate, and less on academics and teaching, I might add. Another major development that took place in the teaching and learning portfolio was in establishing a higher education training and development unit. And this higher education training and development unit has been quite important in assisting us to grow a higher education scholarship. For example, in 2011, we initiated a doctoral program with some 12 students using a cohort model, and this year another 19 students have joined us. And so, and that's just taking the students that have joined specifically in this program, but in partnership with the School of Education, we have over 30 students currently engaged in doctoral studies. And that has continued to generate a level of debate and discussion about higher education and university education that is quite important and useful, not only within South Africa, but on the continent itself. And you will certainly hear more about it in the course of the conference with Professor Damtu Tefere, who has initiated a new journal, and you would have received that, and the journal will be launched in the course of the conference. So we are quite pleased that in that one initiative, a very significant advance has been made on focusing and supporting research in teaching and learning and higher education more generally. A third major initiative that has impacted the university quite significantly is the introduction of a university education induction program, which has a mandatory requirement of continuous professional development for all academics. Those at lecturer level and below are required to attend 4 modules of 80 hours, so 20 hours each, on teaching and learning, curriculum, assessment, and research supervision. And since this initiative has been introduced in 2012, just about 800 academics have already attended at least one module. A fourth major area of contribution towards the scholarship of teaching and learning is our promotions process, which enables academics to be promoted from lecturer right into the professoriate on the basis of excellence in teaching and or research. And we undertook a 5-year analysis of the promotions to examine to what extent teaching has enabled staff to be, or academics to be promoted. And we presented a report this year in Senate, which showed that of the 136 successfully promoted candidates in the past few years, 79 or 58% of them were promoted on the basis of excellence in teaching. So certainly, teaching is valued in a very clear and explicit way in the promotions processes, and we have been able to demonstrate statistically that this significantly assists women or increases their chances of being promoted by 22% by virtue of having teaching as a requirement in the promotions process, which is quite important in the context of women's underrepresentation, especially in the professoriate. And then finally, the Teaching and Learning Conference, these annual Teaching and Learning Conferences, which started in 2000, which was started earlier as workshops in teaching and learning, where you had about 50 or 80 staff attending and just having discussions, to in the last few years, every year we have, as we have this year, about 150 papers being presented, and about just under 300 delegates attending. And we are very pleased that each year we have seen more and more attendance of academics and delegates from universities outside UKZN in the first instance, but now also increasingly from outside the country. So I also just really want to warmly welcome our international guests to this conference. Of course, part of how we've managed to support or grow the conference is by providing a full cycle of research support. So academics have the opportunity to, not only do they get funding to do research in teaching and learning and higher education issues, they get supported with workshops on writing proposals, on writing abstracts, on making presentations. And as you will hear at the end of this conference, each year they get invited to convert their conference presentations into journal articles. And this has enabled us we can account conservatively in the last 5 years until the end of last year, an estimated 78 accredited publications just out of the work of the teaching and learning portfolio. So collectively, these initiatives have created a growing interest in a scholarship of teaching and learning and contributed to an emergent critical mass of scholarship of teaching and learning expertise across disciplines within schools and colleges and within also some of our professional services. It has encouraged an evidence-based and research-informed approach to teaching and learning policies, programs, and interventions. It has embedded a more scholarly discourse in teaching and learning deliberations, and it has enabled a more reflective and creative thinking about teaching and learning in attempting to find solutions to the many challenges confronting universities in providing a quality education. So in effect, the scholarship of teaching and learning has become and continues to be institutionalized at UKZN. But to sustain and grow this scholarship, I think that one of the things maybe that we do note is that we encourage more educational researchers to focus on university education. So it is quite interesting to note that schools of education, faculties of education, focus almost singularly and entirely on the schooling system, and much less on what's happening. Of course, they do focus in teacher education on their own institutional settings, but much less on what happens in the broader university. So you would not find research, or find very little research, that focuses on academics teaching and learning that is not done by the academics themselves. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there isn't research, but much of the research on teaching and learning practices within universities is interestingly done in the context of self-study or on their own practices, or groups of academics on their own practices. Unlike the kind of research you might see happening in schools, where university researchers go and research whole range of schools or large numbers of academics. So I think there is a challenge. I'm making the statement without providing any reasons for that, but certainly there is the challenge of opening universities to research scrutiny. In the PhD program, which is mainly academics doing research for their PhD degrees, it was interesting to note the challenges that they often reported in being able to access access the classrooms or documents or practices, etc., of their fellow academics. And so maybe it's a provocative statement that some of you might disagree with, but I do hope we will have this discussion about how do we advance on a much bigger scale, bringing many more of the theories that have been developed in education in relation to schooling and to other areas into higher education. So the challenge I'm putting to us all is how do we expand scholarship of teaching and learning and scholarship and research in higher education itself? Is it the question about who researches the professors? Who should research the professors? And why is that so difficult? Why is there reluctance to open our own practices to others to scrutinize and to research and to comment on? So with those words, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this, the UKZN 8th Teaching and Learning in Higher Education Conference, and to declare the conference open. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nyna Amin. I'm from the School of Education. So this is my campus, and welcome to my campus. I will be chairing this session on this, what I would say is a glorious day. I ordered perfect weather, and it has arrived. I can't tell you how dizzy with excitement I am about listening to a great intellectual this morning. I'm sure all of you are, just anticipating some great occurrence, and I'm sure it's going to happen. So we await with nervous energy the keynote address of Professor Gayatri Spivak, one of the foremost intellectuals on the planet. What can one say about a scholar who is the epitome of intellectual being? Quite a lot, I think. But I will be brief because her work spans so much. There's so much to say, and if I really have to share all of that with you, we'll be here all day. So I will be describing just a few snippets about her biography, her interests and activities, and her accomplishments. Born in India, she arrived in the US as a fresh 19-year-old, and in the years to come, she would astound the world of cultural theory and philosophy and beyond, I must add, with two stellar contributions. First, the paper, Can the Subaltern Speak?, which continues to be debated and discussed and is often misinterpreted. And it also delivered, I think, one of the most unforgettable lines, white men saving brown women from brown men. And this morning, as I was busy cooking at 5 o'clock in the morning for a brown man, I thought, who would deliver me from this brown man? And I also thought about its relevance to South Africa. Recently, a white woman could not be saved from a white man who shot at an imaginary brown man. In fact, it was a brown man who saved a white man from the gallows. So I think these are some of the ideas offered to us that allows us to challenge and to question our taken for granted senses and beings. So the second thing that Professor Spivak introduced to us was the translation of Derrida's work on grammatology. And I think the English-speaking world was made aware on a grand scale that there was another intellectual whose ideas not only shattered established truths, it would also amputate the legs of philosophy. So linguistics, politics, philosophy, and cultural theory, among some of the fields, would never be the same again, thanks to Spivak. So Professor Spivak's intellectual contributions could be likened to Einstein's E equals mc squared moment. It started an unstoppable chain reaction and spawned the field of post-colonial studies. Professor Spivak can be described as a nonconformist and a counterintuitive thinker. In the last 5 decades, she has been highly productive with no less than 15 books translated into many languages. She has pioneered the field of post-colonialism, and her writings straddle multiple disciplines: feminism, Marxism, deconstruction, globalization, just to mention a few. She makes astute use of critical works to challenge ideas, such as the West is the most civilized and more democratic. She has planted into our consciousness some notable ideas like the subaltern, strategic essentialism, aesthetic education, and epistemological performance. Professor Spivak is a recipient of many prizes, including the Kyoto Prize in 2012 for the Arts and Humanities, and it is regarded as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, which does not have this category. The humanities doesn't matter at that level. Fortunately, there is an alternative. In 2013, she received one of India's highest civilian honors, the Padma Bhushan Award. She has also been awarded a prize by the Guggenheim for the humanities. Her intellectual work includes her activist work in rural education. She continues to spend much time in India and personally funds development work there. She presently holds a position of university professor at Columbia, the first person of color in more than 2.5 centuries.
First woman, Edward Said was also, if you consider us of color in the United States, because we are a safe color, but nonetheless, first woman.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected. So it is my great honor to give to you a brown woman, Professor Gayatri Spivak, to deliver her keynote address.
What a splendid introduction, which I hardly deserve, but I should say that this is the second time that my name has been pronounced together with Einstein's. The first time was because of strange hair. So it's true, I swear, I kid you not, in a Japanese journal. And someone sent it to me, and I had no idea why there was a picture of me and a picture of Einstein on the same page. So I asked a Japanese friend, and she said, it's because of strange hair. So thank you for the second mention. I think perhaps I'm going to try to stand up. I mean, I have a bad spine, but I can hold on. Your words really have enabled me, because I am indeed going to talk a little bit about what happens when education is institutionalized. This is the beginning of the 50th year of my full-time university teaching. I became a tenure-track assistant professor in the fall of 1965. So if I know anything, I know how universities work. And indeed, they're a great weapon for us. I went through the 60s, and so I know that many of those dreams were not indeed very practical. The university needs to be used. But on the other hand, it is true that when something is institutionalized, it's the old laws of institutionalization and disciplinarization that take over rather than the power of the material itself. And so to an extent, the beginning of what seems like success is actually the beginning of problems. And in fact, I take this now. Rabbi told me I could only go 40 minutes. So I have a much longer talk. I have a full dress 50-minute talk, I think. But I'll just stop, because I'm much more interested in, I don't see a clock, however. I am much more interested. Yes, you give me a thing, okay, when it's about 5 minutes, 35 minutes or so. I'm much more interested in question and answer. I'm instructed by it. Okay, now, therefore, and also it was Rabbi who made up the title. And Humanities, it's like a mouthful. My titles are usually one word, By the way, I should tell you something, since I'm not going to read the whole text. I'm going to read as much as I can in 40 minutes. That sentence, white men are saving brown women from brown men. Judith Butler is the only one, so I don't fault you, who actually understood what was going on there. Even I didn't know until I found out, and I told Judy, I must honestly say. I had actually written that sentence in the essay because I don't want myself to be misunderstood, because people do pick that up and fight me both sides. Some say, well, you're crazy, you're wrong, you're bad. And some say, oh, how wonderful you are, you're saintly. But the thing is that I had written that sentence because at that point, I'm a Europeanist. The matter of India is not so easy to learn just by being Indian. You don't become an Indianist. So I didn't know anything about South Asian studies. My mother had an MA in Bengali literature. I'm English, French, and German comparative literature. So therefore, when on the other hand I had to write it, I had to break out from the fact that I had become an expert in French theory. That was 1981, a long time ago. And so I thought that I had to write it, but I knew nothing. I knew nothing. And so, and this has remained the case. I mostly talk about things I know nothing, like theories of education. But you invited me, the fault is yours. But at any rate, I knew nothing. So I said to myself, it's right there in writing, taking Freud's monetary example, I thought that if I constructed a sentence like a child is being beaten, then I could take that sentence as my object of study and move. So the fact that I made that sentence is a mark of my ignorance. That essay is actually about and against and critical of the Hindus. It's not a post-colonial essay. It's an essay which is totally critical of the Hindus, my own so-called tradition. So therefore, in that sentence, what was I doing? This I realized much later. I was citing a white man, namely Freud, in order to save myself, a brown woman, from the Hindus, brown men. So therefore, I was doing exactly, this is why one must learn to read. I was doing exactly what, in fact, I was also criticizing, supposedly, by constructing that essay. So this particular example, when I finally realized, hey, this is what I was doing, I called Judy. I said, Judy, you won't understand what I just discovered, man. I am the object of the critique of this damn essay that's become so popular. And when you do that kind of thing, then you realize an extremely important lesson, which is the lesson of being folded together with your enemy. Being complicit, folded together, not complicit in the sense of conspiratorial or doing something underhanded, but that's the first rule of forging a strong critique, not us and them, but the fact that we are in it together. No excusing, but also no accusing. You enter the protocols of whatever it is that you are critiquing so that you can turn it around. And so this is something that I wanted to tell you about Can the Subaltern Speak, because alas, that is indeed, although I wrote it more than 30 years ago now, it was published in '88, it's the thing that people know. And in my case, and that has something to do with my topic today, it actually became a beginning. Okay, it was not an end, and when people read it as representing me, I think it's my obligation to explain that because can you see I'm not looking at my text at all, because I expect you at 35 minutes to say 5 minutes, and then I will see what I can say. But my students have often said, Professor Spivak, if you lose your job, you can be a stand-up comic. I don't find myself funny in the least. I guess that may be the secret of my success as a comic. But at any rate, so what happened then was that trying to escape out of this becoming the expert on deconstruction and on French feminism, I turned that essay, the first part of it is a critique of Foucault and Deleuze. I turned toward my own class, which is, the sort of comfortable middle class, although the woman that I was dealing with was certainly less comfortable than we were by then. But broadly speaking, I turned to my own class, I turned to my own caste, and I turned to my family. That was where I turned. That isn't really a subaltern. A subaltern is, first of all, a social group, not single. And secondly, a subaltern is someone who is denied access to the structures of social mobility. But where could I go? I went to a family scandal. She was my grandmother's sister. I didn't say so. She had hanged herself, and by the way in which she had hanged herself showed that she had a position against being identified as a woman uniquely connected to a man, her husband. This is what, it was not an illicit pregnancy, in other words. So this family scandal is where I turned in order to escape from my situation in the United States at that moment of being an expert in deconstruction and French feminism, which I think perhaps was a mistake. But, you know, I began then to become de-skilled because people immediately thought I spoke for the non-existent third world, which is not true. I am and I remain interested in Europe as an object of investigation. But at any rate, so then slowly what happened was I realized that I had to go elsewhere, and slowly, this was 88 it was published, and already in 86 I began to do what the idea of the subaltern, it's not my idea, it comes from the Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci. His idea was the production of the subaltern intellectual. And his idea was to make the traditional intellectual, namely myself, super educated, instrumental in learning to learn how to teach cognitively damaged material. So when you say teaching and learning, for me, since I'm not an institution philosophy of education person, for me, this 50 years of institutional teaching at Columbia and at solid universities in the United States, but also in the lowest sector of the electorate in India, my country of citizenship, landless illiterate, so-called untouchables, people who do not know the word that is used by the upwardly class mobile movement, a Sanskrit classical language word, they do not know the word Dalit, which is used outside to recognize that this. So this, judging from these two ends, these are my two areas, two jobs, right? That one began in 86, the US one began in 65, but nonetheless 86 is not nearly 30 years. So these two jobs have taught me this lesson. Learn how to teach this group. So to an extent, Dean, what I am is exactly the person that you were invoking. Good or bad, I don't know. But I am what in theoretical language would be called the dangerous supplement, because what happens when you have confidence in toolkits, knowledge management, which is how generally I was looking at the what's it called now? The quality, what's it, the Q, help me here, the Quality Enhancement Project, QEP, right? I was looking at that. I went to sleep at 5 a.m., so I'm 72 years old. You must forgive me if there are these small lapses. But I did my homework. I was looking at it, and the way in which, and it's very good stuff. I mean, people really want to help the students. They want to bring student success. And it was because, and I quote, the focus is necessitated by the combination of low participation rate, only 17% of 20 to 24-year-olds in 2011, low throughput rates, and stark racial bias in student success. No one can fault this. No one can fault this. Now, on the other hand, when this for speed and convenience, I am not a technophobe. When one goes to John Cotter's work, which was developed within a business context And then I see the remark here in the published literature, much of it can be adapted to a higher education context. I will say, no, sir, no. Because the way in which one leads and succeeds in business is good with these kinds of knowledge management toolkit type systems. That's a very different kind of undertaking. That sort of success is not the success in preparing the ground with damaged cognitive systems. You see, at home when I work with my students, I tell them, I have come to repay ancestral debts. I'm a good person. My parents were incredibly good people, plain living, high thinking, anti-casteist, against religious sectarianism. They were very solid people. But 2 generations of good people are nothing in the context of thousands of years of cognitive damage. We brought you up by denying you the right to intellectual labor, brought you up for manual labor, punished you for intellectual labor, and indeed bred in you obedience. Now this is what I want you to know, that I'm your enemy, because history is larger than personal goodwill, and I want you to be able to work without me. Now this particular situation, to learn how to teach, and they know what I'm talking about. Everything is shared. My education teacher, my education director has had 7 years of schooling. My ecological agriculture director has had 4 years of schooling, nothing but elementary schooling, and really bad education, so that they have been destroyed. Some of the illiterate ones are smarter when they're smart, because they haven't been ruined by bad education. So in that kind of a context, when you take knowledge management, what I am obliged to say is that it actually impoverishes, existential impoverishment for the sake of convenience. It actually destroys the possibility of education in the broader sense. As I said, I'm not a technophobe. What I do is, this is not how you teach everything, but Rabi gave me the title of Democracy and Humanities, okay? So I'm a good follower, I'm not a leader. And so therefore I will say that I'm talking about the connection between humanities and democracy, which is not just me, autonomy and freedom. It is also, it's a deep aporia, deep contradiction. It's also, and at the same time, equality, which is to say people who are completely dissimilar to me, rogues and thieves, anybody, they are the same as I am. So that's a real contradiction. It's not just like human rights, it's just justified self-interest, but that does not produce a just society. Democracy has at its heart this intolerable contradiction, which is why democracy has to be worked at. And so in that context, I am talking about humanities teaching. I'm not talking about how you teach everything. I'm just talking about this kind of slow cooking of the soul, as it were, without which you cannot use systems. You can use systems because your soul has been cooked before. You know, you can use this kind of knowledge management because a basis has been built which it can be only slow. There is no other way. Speed is essential, but in order to be able to use speed right, rather than just for hacking, or rather than for pornography, or rather than for all kinds of piracy and theft, really, in order to be able to use speed, you have to first prepare the ground. It's like a dangerous horse. you have to know how to ride. So I say that quality and development are compromised and existentially impoverished by a complete confidence in so-called toolkits and templates. I was looking at the picture of national and local coordination in that thing that I was studying. And I'm not against these kinds of things, but this is not going to change people. The people upon whom this, if you look at the Kotter statements, most of it is psychological stuff, of a kind of behaviorist stuff. That's not how, we dream at night. That's normal. Who dreams? Our subjectivity is not just what we have learned to do in a kind of focused way. So when it says something as broad, the Kotter thing, incorporating changes into the culture, are you joking? Incorporating changes into the culture? You can only do this if you have earned the right to enter the damn culture, the other. That's literary education. Because not just reading novels, but teaching reading so that you hang out in the space of the other. You can tell the good student from the bad student in this kind of literary education, in imaginative activism, when you can see that this person, I'm not saying everything can be taught this way, but the reason why we needed to do the base is that even the poorest of the poor, and you cannot imagine how poor my students are. I don't notice that they're poor because I'm just their teacher, just as I didn't notice in Texas that they were oil millionaires' children who couldn't go to Ivy League. I don't notice whether my students are rich or poor. They're just students, okay? They're not even really human beings. I love them all. Is this possible, to love all human beings? No. The category student is in, I'll come to that at the end. Nyna gave me many, many questions. I was going to answer them all, but I haven't even approached them. But the final question was a heavy-duty one, which is how do we escape the Anthropocene? By recognizing that unless we want to mooch over the humans who have destroyed our planet for thousands of years, in fact, in this strong sense, don't misunderstand me, I'm quite sure someone will ask me a question on this one. Really, the really solid education that I'm talking about, constructing the base, if we understand what human beings are like, how they become other than animal, it dehumanizes. We mooch over human, wonderful word, but in fact, when you begin to, in my native language, raising a child is called manushkara, making human. But human in the sense of taking them, I'm not a believer in original sin. I wasn't born a Hindu, B, born a Christian, Freudian era, and B, I have no religion. But I think teaching is sacred, but I've seen religion become completely destructive in my childhood. Those of you who have read My Nationalism and the Imagination, you know those experiences. And look at what's happening today. So therefore, I would say that this sense of thinking that somehow the human is in the image of God and so on and so forth, every bit of experience in careful teaching, especially if you're a feminist, undoes this conviction. So therefore, the confrontation of the Anthropocene, we have to be very careful about this. Well, now when I take my motto from Kafka, perhaps there is only one cardinal sin, impatience. Because of impatience, we were driven out of paradise. Because of impatience, we cannot return. And so this particular work that I'm talking about, trying to learn from the student on top, destroyed by digital idealism and superpower confidence, thinking that history happened because they could come into being, helping the whole world. That's my Columbia classroom, full of good thoughts. There's nothing wrong with them. I love them. They're students, right? But on the other hand, they are spoiled. And in the same way, at the bottom, those untouchables, I use that horrifying word, because there is still that kind of prejudice in the rural backwoods. So they are themselves destroyed by the denial of the right to intellectual labor. Up top, another denial of the right to intellectual labor, digital idealism. Okay? In the 19th century, Villiers de l'Isle-Adam wrote a book, Axel, where he has the memorable quote, it's much more wonderful in French, "As for living, we'll let our servants do it for us." Okay? That's Villiers de l'Isle-Adam, Axel. Today, it is almost as if among my students, as for thinking, we'll let the computer do it for us. Now, that's not a labor-saving device. You do not save intellectual labor. See, that's the problem when one begins to think about it. I mean, I'm not against using computers. My goodness, of course not. I'd be crazy. I was complaining that I slept so little because the internet wasn't working. But the internet is my servant. It's not my master. So to an extent, it's not going to change the fact of how I can construct people who use. Okay, now when I had written this text, I'd written the answers to Nyna's many questions, that was my abstract, I was a little cross, and I had said, the impatience of digital developments have imposed the notion of the abstract on intellectuals. You know, I mean, I gave my first, I used to be, if I may boast, I'm so old, and Bengalis are generally boastful, I'm just acting my own identity. If you know Bengalis, they're called bongs in India because they are sentimental, they're liars, and they're boastful. So therefore, what can I say? You know, I love them, but so the thing is, I used to be the national debating champion of India in the 50s, right? So therefore, I know that in those early days, nobody asked for abstracts. Abstracts imprison you. Now you have this whole thing, every place, Professor Spivak, someone even asked for a 1,000-word abstract. Give me a break here. So now this allows, I said, audiences to have expectations that may well be contradicted by the issues that excite the future speaker as it gets closer to composing the presentation. The issue, unfortunately, that fills many of us with a very negative excitement today is war. War, war. Today, it's being called counterterrorism. I have been thinking only of this since I came here. I wrote many notes in my notebook about this war being an example of teaching and learning gone wrong. And I was thinking back into I've written about this elsewhere, about the subduing of Byzantium, the imperial envy of the Ottomans, the Sykes-Picot agreements, the rewriting of the map, what happens? Teaching and learning and the beginning of a negative cultural memory, teaching and learning gone wrong. But to argue that would take us too far from our concerns today, quality promotion and professional development. Remarks will touch upon those concerns, but there is a link that I will mention. The war teaches us how political economy, using the ideology of race, can destroy teaching and learning. See, I've been working now for 5 years on W.E.B. Du Bois's huge book, Black Reconstruction, in America. The only reason why people do not read about decolonization being the establishment of national capital is because he's a black man. He's been identitarianized into double consciousness and all of that, when arguably he's the best historian and sociologist of the United States in the 20th century. In the United States, they read de Tocqueville, but they don't read Du Bois. So what I've been working on him, I hope to finish the book, which is now 5 years late, on Du Bois from this angle. But this idea, and the more he says that the ideology of race is used by political economy to destroy teaching and learning, people like my friend Henry Louis Gates Jr. will say, the more he talks Marx, the less he's black. This is a joke. I mean, you know, as he's looking at how United States capital is establishing itself, abolition capital, he is not listened to because he's not just talking identity. And I bring us back to that contradiction at the center of democracy. Democracy is not just my group, autonomy. For me, I have justified self-interest, I was oppressed. That ain't democracy. That's human rights, and also not done well, because the person who is being helped is not, does not become the subject of rights thinking. But the idea in democracy is that my autonomy will be completely and constantly questioned by the understanding that people completely dissimilar to me and people who are not necessarily good people are also my equals. This liberty and equality, the contradiction within themselves, that is something that you have to realize. The national capital formation, okay? Decolonization takes the form of national capital formation. It does the same thing as this war is doing. Political economy, using the ideology of race, destroying teaching and learning. I can't go into it in detail, but I have notes in my notebook precisely about this. I've been thinking about this. Today, the, quote, rule of law, unquote, arises because barriers between national capital and global capital are removed, and the state is run to manage the global economy, rather than specifically to look after its citizens. That is the rule of unconstituted global law. Unconstituted. It's the law of the same system of exchange being established everywhere. The state is managerial. That's why we have this concept of rule of law, which has nothing to do with constitutions. The state can be run by ad hoc committees. Now, and it is the name of this system of governance is one that we all know. It's called neoliberalism. And it is this, quote, rule of law that dictates the kind of toolkits represented by the Quality Enhancement Project. This does not undermine the ability to use it sincerely. Remember what I said. There is personal goodwill in me and in you, but history is larger than personal goodwill. Unless we know that, our practice will be limited by exactly what you were saying, institutional prerogatives, which ultimately is dictated by that rule of law, which ain't constitutional. So I will soon concern myself, I won't actually, with how to use toolkits, but let me point out that what I have just said about the subsumption of national capital under global capital to produce governance by, quote, rule of law is an answer to one of the bullet-pointed questions given in my abstract, which I really got. Nyna sent me, like, I now know why, because you thought I was Einstein by mistake. I only resemble him in my haircut. Not exactly the opposite. I legitimate his haircut by reversal. That's a, But let me point out that what I have just said about the subsumption of national capital under global capital to produce governance by rule of law is an answer to one of the bullet-pointed questions given in my abstract. What is the role of the state and constitutionality in the current global formation? You look at how I'm also on the Council on Values of the World Economic Forum. And this is an argument that I have made repeatedly at the World Economic Forum, that they're, like your quality enhancement project, the Council's project of new social covenant is also well-meaning, very well-meaning. It's exactly the same kind of list, only longer. And two things are mixed up there. One is walking the walk, talking about institutional change, and the other is talking the talk, which is like huge, general quality, etc. The word quality is a very ambiguous and mysterious word. The education is a terrifying knowledge. Those are terrifying words. But they have these general agreement on, like that incorporate change in culture. Agreement on the general human values. Are you kidding me? That's part of that. That's part of that national covenant. And so I say to them, I understand that. 5 minutes, okay. So maybe I should say something. You see, here is your toolkit picture, by the way. Yellow and green. But I should perhaps say why national liberation is not a revolution, or I should perhaps say something about what I said to the World Economic Forum. Shall I do that? Let me find that little bit, and I have only 5 minutes. Okay, yes, there we go. There we are. I said this just very recently in Stellenbosch to the World Economic Forum. I said that the good jobs, the World Economic Forum talks two kinds of items. One, talking the talk, basic human values. The other, walking the walk, good jobs for non-graduates, strong technical education opportunities, apprentice schemes, a proactive tax and incentive system, and 21st century industrial strategy. One cannot walk the walk by merely agreeing to do so. It is a collective decision, not merely something enforced from the top. So you bring these disadvantaged students with damaged cognitive systems, which is the fault of the society and certainly of the globe. I could give a talk for 2 hours now with which you would agree, and you would, in fact, speak from the audience to agree with me if you're people of goodwill. So therefore, in that situation, from the top, you impose this adapted from business system from Harvard, John Cotter, and that nothing changes. Nothing changes, like the Millennium Development Goals, top-down philanthropy. And the thing is that when, in fact, it doesn't work because you're giving it to cognitively damaged epistemes, then there is a kind of unacknowledged little racism in your heart. You're good people, you can't say anything. God, have I seen this? The idea of, hey, we gave them everything, but they can't really handle it. They can't really do it. This is such a stupid thing. This is such a denial of history. This is such a denial of complicity. And this is what I was saying to these oligarchs. So I said to them, the World Economic Forum, let me explain this last statement. I said, I'm a teacher. I said, you have to learn the habit of thinking about other people as equal, though not same. Exactly the situation between the reading pupil and the one who produced the literary work in a good literature class. Because it's not literary history. It's not literary analysis, which is like cross-examining. It is hanging out in the space of the other text. That's what we're talking about. And it doesn't have to be a work of literature. It exists in other kinds of cultural formations, in other ways. So let me, I said to them, explain this last statement. And now I have 2 minutes maybe. Okay, I said, I'm a teacher of literature as well as a member of the Council on Values, so perhaps I emphasize literary reading too much. But I have also given time and skill, not just money and site visits, for 30 years, training teachers and children at 6 small elementary schools established by me among the landless illiterate Dalits in Western West Bengal. So however impractical I may seem, hear me out, I said to them. Normally, our desire is to do things ourselves or for ourselves. In good literary teaching, the student is taught carefully to hang out in the space of the other, understand what he or she confronts in terms of the unknown person who wrote what he or she confronts. This is the secret of the ethical and the democratic. One has to stay with it, not follow easy steps so that one can say, I have helped you. The reason why I don't accept corporate funding is not because I'm Christ-like. I'm only an English professor. Rabi knows I'm constantly asking for money. But it's because I will not be evaluated by these jerks who do knowledge management. They don't understand that you don't undo thousands of years of cognitive damage in 30 years. Who wins loses there. The very standards of evaluation are insane and silly. So therefore, that's why I won't bring in there people who talk to me about them in a language they don't understand. I have earned just a little bit of historical trust. They're not dumb. They're trained up always to agree with the ruling class. So all of these NGOs go with their interpreters. They don't go where I am. This is completely below the radar. But when they go, the people, they say, hey, yes, nice, of course, we agree. And of course, what else will they say? That's what they have been trained to say, and this is used as a photo op to support to show that support is coming from the subaltern. It's a joke. The subaltern may be anything, but the subaltern is not necessarily stupid. That's the whole problem here, and I think I've come to an end. So I will say that I wish I could. Yes, today the emphasis in education is acquiring digital speed. In order to be able to use the digital for social justice, as I said, the soul has to be trained slowly. Recently, at the celebration of the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe's life, the positive effect of his literary writings was repeatedly emphasized. With my experience of work in Africa, and I work in Nigeria with a project on African mother tongues, unsystematized, which are really a survival thing rather than an endangered thing. That's a very big thing. But anyway, I'm in Nigeria all the time. I just was there last week. So in terms of my experience of work in Africa at a small university, Kwara State, small rural new university, doing IT there. I'm not against a database, which is but preparing people, mentoring people to be able to use this from the community to international researchers. It's an amazing, I wish I could talk about that. But I was obliged to say, with my experience of work in Africa, below a certain class line, Nigerians had no idea who he was and what he wrote and do not know his name. So the task, therefore, was to expand the circle of Nigerians who could not only read. Literacy by itself is nothing. As I say, some of the illiterate ones have their intelligence. I can talk to them because they have not been ruined by this kind of bad, systematized education where success is measured by numbers. So the task, therefore, was to expand the circle of Nigerians who could not only read, but also learn from the literary. That's the task, not just to say Chinua Achebe is the glory of Nigeria. Why is there such an upsurge of interest in knowledge, asks Lawrence Prusak, editor of Knowledge in Organizations, and cites the pre-Socratics. Such a question ignores the plain fact that the word knowledge has changed since the pre-Socratics. There was, of course, no English at the time. And if we are thinking the world, we must, absolutely must, remember the many languages that make meaning for its peoples. As a doctor working in Kenya who refuses to be a top-down health worker remarked, the people will understand Swahili, but you can't speak to their heart unless you speak their language. I'm getting what you're saying, but I'm not taking it in, said one of the HIV mothers. That is a basic human value, talking to the heart. If you think it is inconvenient, as it is indeed, don't dream of improving the world, I said to the World Economic Forum. Real knowledge depends on cooking the soul with slow learning, not the instant soup of a one-size-fits-all toolkit. The world, and I'm not saying throw away your systems. I'm saying the systems are very convenient, they're very good things, but infuse them with something else, customize them. Do not use them to produce a mainstream where there's immense class, race, gender stratification. And what society doesn't have that stratification? You cannot produce a mainstream. It is impossible. That is indeed a lie to the heart. So last sentence, the world is not populated by humanoid drones, although we are supposedly becoming more and more like humanoid drones, if a recent Economist article, I read them on the planes, is to be believed. You cannot produce a toolkit for a moral metric, or if you do, you will be disappointed, I said to the World Economic Forum. I'm not speaking to you directly, but those are people who really can make change. They are people who have the ear of the policymakers. But that's not enough, you know. You realize that the European Court of Justice just passed the foreign exchange trade tax, right? But the financial industry is trying to turn it down in Europe because of competition from Goldman Sachs in the United States. So that's the rule of law, because the law will be changed. When you're losing, you change the law. So therefore, the Court of Justice couldn't do anything. The Court of Justice is a little bit like a constitution. But the unconstituted rule of law, and I don't have enough time, but this kind of perception of quality, cluster of excellence, etc., these things are produced by that unconstituted, global, quote, rule of law, unquote, which substitutes for constitutions because the state is managerial. So therefore, although I have spoken in a very disorganized way because I'm so full of excitement, negative excitement because of war on CNN as I'm working in my little room, nonetheless, I've tried not to bluff you and bring to you exactly the kind of dangerous supplement that has to be deconstruction, that has to be put on these kinds of successful systems in order to bring in the incalculable, because toolkits stop the contingent, and there is no computer that can catch the contingent. Programs will be developed that can go as far as they can go, but there will be something at the end of it that will be the contingent, the unexpected, like the new literary, new artistic form that surprises the old critic, and every generalization changes. So I hope we will have a good question and answer session where you will instruct me, and thank you very much for your attention and your laughter.
You'll notice at this time we have changed the tradition of having a respondent to the keynote, because I don't think anyone is interested in what I have to say. So we're going to open it to the floor and perhaps grab as many questions in the very limited time that we have. Maybe we can steal some time from tea. No, we can't do that. So we have 10 minutes and open to question, comments.
I just want to raise a question of how is this possible? I hear you that you're talking about how you can't do it with subalterns even in 30 years. How do we do this in class when we have a test in 3 weeks or an exam at the end of the semester? And it is difficult for students to read, for instance, women's resistance poetry without seeing prostitutes. And, it's not that I'm judging prostitutes, but the reading of sexual violence by an Algerian woman poet who wrote about how she was tortured in prison gets misread. How do we deal with the challenges of time in our classrooms?
This is a very difficult question, an important, good question, and I, of course, share the same problem, because in these... India supposedly has compulsory primary education free, right? That is also a joke. So what I say to the government people, the block development officers, which is the lowest post of the civil service, below that is local self-government, I say to them, because at first they're skeptical. I'm not American, but nonetheless, they think it's one of those American persons come to, of this ethnic origin, come to do good, and they leave us alone because they are rightly skeptical of that kind of intervention. That's the seeking of celebrity and so on. But slowly they see that no, something else is going on here. And I go to them quite often and I say, all we are offering here, these are not non-formal schools. They are free, collective, private tuition for those students who are completely ignored in the primary schools because they don't teach in the primary schools. But anyway, so there, of course, I have to prepare them for taking the exams. I'm not saying I've succeeded, okay, but I'm sharing with you the way I approach this problem. You can't deal with these very poor people who are going to school with your idea of cognitive damage and this and that, and they fail the exams. This is not correct. So although the exams are worth nothing, but nonetheless they have to pass. So what I do is I do a lot of chat type training with my other trainer who comes down with me, and encourage, because there are smart students, and these teachers of mine whom I've been with for so many decades, they can understand why that education is bad, but why, on the other hand, one must learn how to take the exam. So there is a difference between learning answers by heart when you understand the answer, and learning answers by heart when you don't understand the answer. And there is a difference between knowing that in the schools of the ruling class, if the answer, because I'm not an English medium educated person. I went through the same Paschim Bango Shikha Parishad. I don't even know exactly what the English is, the West Bengal Education Commission, I suppose. I don't know what it's called exactly. I went through the same schooling, right? Same exam, not senior Cambridge or anything. So I would say that in the schools of the ruling class, in fact, the ones who don't write exactly what the answer is get the better grade, but you don't. So I arouse in them what I used to try to arouse in the so-called self-proclaimed bourgeois white males in my classes in the 70s and the 80s. Develop some rage against the system that has brought you into this predicament, but learn how to do what they expect. Because if you develop rage without learning how to do, the ruling class doesn't mind if you die by killing. Violence is quite happily absorbed by the ruling class. It's when, and I have examples of this, which I want another question, so I won't say that. It is when the untouchable, the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, learns democratic judgment that 4 of my schools were closed by the local landowner. 20 years of labor, completely destroyed. I didn't do anything because the only ones who would really suffer were the people there, right? But that's, so what I do with them in order for them to pass the exams is share the secret of how meaningless the exams are, okay? So, that way, they're not failing. They're not failing. But the exam is not everything either. I test the teachers and say, so, you remember the decimal system? No. No, because ill-taught. So therefore, and I don't teach poetry and violence. This is why you had a question about textbooks, and I don't think textbooks are anything. Because textbooks, excuse me for this extremely, remember, I'm only talking about the humanities. Textbooks are only produced according to the textbook maker's idea of equality and all that. They've never come down, they've never come below the radar. They think they are the model of the human being. I went in like that too, making mistakes, thinking you must take them to your heart and say, oh, how nice you are, I love you, I love you. People who are completely traumatized at home, children, they know that when the ruling class comes to visit, they hug them. Big joke. And so this idea of how not to think, that, they will think independently. Are you joking? When nobody has been ever allowed to think independently? And, they're full of rage because they know they should be able to, because the children have not been ruined yet. I mean, I wish I could go on giving you millions of examples, but this is also true at the top. People think that the top is good. But I've been teaching full-time at good universities in the United States for 49 plus years. And I can assure you that the trivialization of the humanities and this kind of digital idealism has also cognitively damaged the people I teach, which is the top of the tree. I only teach PhD students. So therefore, this business of teaching, learning to understand how to access the epistemological machines of cognitively damaged people in order to teach them so that you don't enter the classroom thinking, I know how to teach. This is the secret for me, of humanities teaching, play to lose. Who wins, loses. It really, because it's a difficult thing. I'm sorry I gave you such a long answer, but it's so much the question. How do you harm them by ignoring the exams? I have an answer to the violence thing, but I would like to hear more. I will say something. I will say, because this is really important. People talk about post-humanism, etc., which is complete nonsense. Okay, you should certainly try to turn around this incredible climate change, but you can't become a post-humanist so easily. Now, in those areas, although there are laws, who sees? So there's child marriage, there's dowry taking, there's everything. Dowry is social security. So you have to understand what's going on. You have to be where they are. So what to do with child marriage? You can't just say, women's reproductive rights. No. Like you say, the reaction to violence is different. Look at the episteme. Don't just impose judgments taken from the floor of the UN. So therefore, I thought and thought and thought and thought, and then about 5 years ago, I began talking to the women and the men, saying, you don't let the calves breed so quickly, do you? And so you're letting your daughter's body be used so quickly. That ain't a good thing. Because there is, in fact, that is a certain kind of pre-theoretical post-humanism. When I could bring to them this idea, it's changing, it's changing, it's changing. And I heard a wrong statement the other day from one of the guys, but I didn't correct him because I could see that what I was talking about is happening. One of my, Neil Lohar is his name, his daughter has produced a child that can't raise its neck, etc. This has nothing to do, I think, with child marriage. But I overheard him say, Ish, sister did say, we shouldn't really allow our daughters to breed so early. So, see, something has worked. Something has worked. I'm not going to go and give them the correct. There is a difference between the exactitude of truth and the register of truth and the register of exactitude. What's the use my going and telling him, no, it has nothing to do with that, it has some other reason. Poetically, it's correct. So, therefore, this idea of how do you access the episteme that has other values is because the same values are being touted up top as post-humanist, animal rights and so on. But this is working. My mother was 15 years old when my brother was born. So to an extent, my grandmother, my father's mother, was married at 5. So to that extent, the idea of how to access is not that far behind me. So this is something that I will say, yes, you deal with the reaction to violence in a text by accessing the episteme, because you too make those kinds of mistakes, except you don't know it. So therefore, caught as you are within you should hear the people in global development talking to me because their heads are so full of cement that they're unable to see that convenience is not African folks doing rural development, I've asked them singly, although they've all told me I'm only on the ivory tower and they're helping people. I said, okay, these people, do you ever access them? I said, yes. How? We collect the data before, then we train research assistants and send them out to validate the data. And I asked to every single one of them, and I'm not just once. The last meeting was in Arusha in Tanzania. And I said, is there ever a surprise? And the answer, since I talk singly, is always no. The toolkit stops the contingent. They are not capable of surprise.
Thank you for that, Professor Spivak.
Yes, I'm sorry, it's very long.
No, it's fine. I just want to say that we have not been disappointed. You have really been a catalyst this morning to recharge our thinking. I think you've really rewired our brains. For me, I think what is really coming to is this deep self-reflective nature and the intellectual honesty. Some ideas that you have left with us is beware success. I think we should keep that in mind. Manage rage. And learning is destabilizing, but it can be funny and comic. And I think it will leave us with the last question, is it's not about who will research the professors. Maybe it's about who will teach the professors to learn. Thank you.